Are you a church leader trying to navigate the tension of doing ministry both online and in person? Welcome to the Bricks and Clicks Church Leadership Podcast, a podcast where church leaders and ministry experts share ideas, solutions, and experiences about making church work both in person and online. Meet the hosts of Bricks and Clicks, a Brit and an Aussie who became friends in their efforts of making churches irresistible. Duncan Banks lives just outside London, England, and Jason Perkins lives in Brisbane, Australia. Without further ado, here are your hosts, Banksy and Perko.
Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Wednesday webinar, wherever you are in the world. We're so pumped to have you. If you are in Australia, we are thrilled that you chose to stay up on a Wednesday night to hang out with us here on the webinar tonight. If you are in the UK, thanks for taking a bit of your lunch break to join us. And if you are in the US, first of all, I've got a question for you. What are you doing out of bed this early? Because it is 5 o'clock in the morning Central Time. If you are in Austin, Texas, where our good friends Jordan and Shane are from, hook 'em, go Longhorns. But it is 6 o'clock on the East Coast and much earlier in the Mountain Time and Pacific Time. So we are pumped that you've chosen to be with us today. If you are joining us for the webinar, wherever you're joining us from, I see a bunch of people there that are joining us tonight or this afternoon or this morning, wherever you're at. We would love to hear where you are joining us from. So if you would jump into the chat straight away and just let us know where you're tuning in from and what church you're connected with, that would be really, really helpful for us because we would love to know all of those details. We've got Jordan Geist and Shane Norcross from Northpoint Church in Austin, Texas as our guests tonight. We are pumped that you guys chose to jump in to this call. Thank you, guys. Duncan, before we dive in, though, to the conversation, Duncan, what are we going to get out of today's webinar? What are the takeaways for those that are on the webinar tonight or this afternoon?
Yeah, I think I've got the best deal here, Perko. What time is it for you in Brisbane?
It's 8 o'clock at night, which is not that bad. And in Perth,
it's not too bad.
People are just having dinner in Perth right now, so it's totally fine.
That's all right. It's 5 a.m. for our guests in Austin. And I mean, it's 11 in just outside London where I am. So it's morning coffee time. The sun is shining. So I think I've got the best deal here. I really have. So anyway, these are the things that we hope you'll take away from our hour together. All of us are trying to wrestle with this idea of how on earth do we create a church that goes beyond the hour on Sunday. And this is the beautiful thing that this whole pandemic has given to us, this gift it's given to us, is we've realized we can't do church as usual. And so that hour service on a Sunday morning feels like it's not enough to keep people engaged and connected and learning and growing and part of us. So how do we use the other 167 hours in a week to keep these people engaged and reach new people? And when I found out what these guys were doing at Northpoint in Austin, it blew my mind. And I am so excited for you to pick up some of this learning because I think it could be a game changer for all of us who are trying to lead churches. So that's the big takeaway, how you can think about church beyond Sunday and keep people connected and engaged for the other 167 hours in a week. And if you don't come away with that, then I'll promise you, Perko will give you your money back.
Absolutely. We'll give you your registration fees back immediately. There's a bunch of people jumping into the chat. We've got people that are saying hi from Brisbane. We got people from Wales. We got people in Manchester in the UK. We got people from all over that are in the chat saying hello to us. We'd love it if you would jump into the chat, tell us where you're watching from, where you're listening from, and then if you'd also tell us the name of the church that you're connected with, that would be really, really helpful for us. And we're going to start off by just getting to know our guests tonight or this afternoon. Shane and Jordan are in Northpoint Church in Austin, but we're going to keep it within the Commonwealth to start with, Duncan. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Shane is actually a Canadian. And so to keep it in the Commonwealth, I'm going to start, Shane, by asking you if you would just tell us a little bit about what your role at Northpoint Church is, and then how did you get involved in ministry there? Because you weren't involved in ministry when I first met you at Northpoint Church as far as an official staff role. You were doing something else. So I'd love to just have you share a little bit of that story.
For sure. And before I answer your questions, Jason, I just want you to know that I'm honored to be here and spend this time with you guys, even if it is 5 a.m. and it's pitch black outside behind me. I am Canadian and I enjoy speaking and talking to others that are part of the Commonwealth. My wife is Texan, and that's why I'm here in Texas. When we got married, we compromised and moved to Texas. And I actually grew up in a church. I spent my entire life in church. But church to me was a Sunday morning experience. I went to church. I sat in a row for an hour, and then I went home. And I honestly was a lonely, isolated, broken man. I put on this mask on Sunday mornings, and the rest of my week I didn't know how to live. And it wasn't until I met our lead pastor, Buck Ebelhouse at Northpoint Church. I actually met him at another church, and I got into a community group where I recognized the power of authentic Christian community, and it changed my life and it wrecked me. And now I'm passionate about helping people find what I found and what I discovered. And so I've been on staff at Northpoint for, I think, 4 years. Before that, I was a volunteer for quite a while. I didn't think I would ever go on staff at a church, but Buck wore me down and finally took care of all of my excuses and reasons why I shouldn't be on staff, and got me to make the jump. And it's a decision that I have never regretted. So I love getting to do what I get to do. And I'm the groups director at Northpoint Church. So my primary role is helping people find community and find a place where they can be encouraged to pursue authentic community and spiritual growth. So that's my primary role at Northpoint.
Shane, I love it. And I feel like I probably had similar conversations with Buck where I threw a number of excuses to him. Because I had a really good gig when I was living in Texas.
Yeah.
And I remember many conversations with Buck where he finally said, you know what, you should really be leading a church, Burko. And I finally took the plunge as well. And I'm forever grateful for his friendship and his leadership in my life. And Shane, I'll just quick reminiscing. I remember when I was a small group leader, adult small group leader at the church in Austin. And Shane would hound me, Duncan, to make sure that I got my attendance reports in to let him know who was actually attending group and who wasn't attending group. And I'll tell you why he did it. He was so passionate to not let people slip through the cracks and not find a place in community. He was so passionate to make sure that people found community. So I'm super thankful that you've had great leadership investment in my life. I'm super grateful for it. So
are you sure about that, Jason? Jason, are you sure about that? Are you sure it's nothing to do with the more his numbers go up in groups, the more his wages go up as well? I'm not sure it's just about getting people in.
I'm not going to tell Jason that, Duncan.
I actually know for a fact, Duncan, that doesn't work. It doesn't work that way at Northpoint Church in Austin. Okay. I know it all too well. But hey, Jordan, it is so good to have you on the call, mate. Man, I remember doing youth ministry together for a little bit, and Sunday afternoons when we were meeting in the elementary school and the primary school to set up an environment for high schoolers. And you were a high schooler leading the whole thing, and you still are in leadership at the church. Maybe just share with people on the webinar a little bit of your story, how you got plugged in at Northpoint and what your role is currently.
Yeah, and like Shane said, I'm super grateful to be here. This is just like a really cool, full circle moment for us a little bit, thinking about meeting 10 years ago. But yeah, so I didn't grow up in church. Unlike Shane, I had, more of the Christmas and Easter experience, not great church experiences growing up. And so up until, 17 years old, kind of the very end of high school, I wasn't going anywhere. However, I did come to Northpoint kind of through a girl similar to Shane. I mean, you were Austin because of a girl, but Emily, who is now my wife, had invited me to, this Wednesday night event that was like, I don't know, 15 people in this kind of empty room, music, YouTube videos on the wall. Like, it is a miracle that I ended up enjoying this experience, especially kind of being out on church. If it weren't for Emily, there's no way I would have come back. But we were just small then. We were set up and tear down then. And then I came, a few times this Wednesday night, and then to Northpoint on a Sunday morning finally. And for me, I had never even really experienced like any kind of non-denominational church. Half the church that I went to growing up, the service was in a different language. So just to hear like English was cool for me. But so that was a good start. And then I really did. I fell in love with it. Just the ability to be myself, the authenticity of it, the ability to ask questions. I had a lot of intellectual questions. I felt safe to ask all those. Groups context was huge for that for me as well. And then we were just so small that anybody could be in, leadership. It was like, hey, you're a student. We've got 4. Will you, come and help? And so between set up and tear down and student leadership and all that, I just had lots of opportunities to stay engaged and involved. And then went to the University of Texas, which is only, about 30 minutes away. So I was able to intern with Northpoint throughout college. But it was actually at Northpoint, end of high school, that I placed my trust in Christ and really kind of launched the journey from there. So I came on staff, I guess, just a few months before Shane. So because it was January 2016. And I started with students and have been our student director. I still am our student director, but took on this new content role only as recently as July here. So.
Well, listen, guys, thank you for, again, getting up so early in the morning and being with us on the webinar. I'd love to start by just asking you about this thing that I stumbled across that really is the catalyst for why I reached out to both of you to ask if you would be on this webinar. And it's this graphic that I came across that you guys have developed, and you refer to it as your flywheel. In fact, I think Jordan's going to maybe bring it up on the screen here for us so that people can see what I'm talking about. As I came across this graphic, this flywheel, it really, for me, was a simple strategy to help connect with your community beyond Sundays, beyond your service. And so when I saw this graphic, I was like, man, that's very doable. That's a very doable strategy that I think is also transferable to other churches as well. And we'll get into having you guys explain this flywheel in just a second. But you guys explained to me how you got to the graphic through a really profound question that you guys wrestled with and you kind of processed with for a number of, I guess, days, weeks, meetings. And I would love if you would just share with us, what was the question that led you to this strategy, and what was the process like in trying to wrestle through that? And I don't know which one of you want to take the question or the process, but jump right in.
Yeah, I can jump in on it, Shane. And then if you want to, add any context that I miss, I mean, for context, I think this is pretty common across the board as we're hearing and connecting with a lot of churches, but, right around, for us, it was March timeframe here when things, kind of shut down, spring break. And we had been doing church online already, and we just kind of invested in that a little bit more, tried to like tweak things and make production quality a little better and stuff like that. And real high energy momentum for the first, couple of months. People were excited about the opportunity to still connect. And then, momentum started to wane the longer that we were in this, and the more people realized, oh, this isn't just a 2-week thing. And so we sat down, this was, kind of early July, as we were in a second spike here in Austin and really starting, it was to sink in that we were in it for the long haul. And we just acknowledged we hadn't really done anything to innovate. We hadn't really done anything to change or be proactive, take advantage of the moment. We had really just reacted, and we'd reacted well. I don't even mean that in a negative sense. I mean, we changed and got everything online, and it was great. But we were saying, hey, if this is going to be our foreseeable future, and if all of our normal tools are taken away from us, kind of our top 10 core sweet spot strategies that we've always known and loved, and it's helped us get to this point, if those have all been taken away, I mean, are we just gonna more or less throw in the towel and say, we'll wait this out and it's okay and it's hard for everybody? Or are we going to say, no, like our mission has never changed. It's to lead people in a growing relationship with Christ. And what are we going to do? Like, how are we going to adapt? How are we going to react? And so the question that was thrown out, I honestly can't remember. I don't know if this was Buck, our lead pastor. I don't even remember who brought it up, but they were basically saying at a leadership team, we said, what if we could never gather as a church in this building again? Like, what if that was our reality? What would we do different? And it wasn't until we asked that question that we really started to think different. Because up to that moment, it really was a little bit more of a survival mode and this unspoken or spoken thing in the back of our mind that we're just kind of waiting to get back in person. And hopefully that's going to save everything and be the end all be all fix. And so that question launched a lot of what I think we'll, talk about over the next hour here.
So Jordan, just let me kind of recap and summarize what I'm hearing. You guys come into COVID like everyone across the world. Let's call it March. You guys invest a little bit more into your online experience that you already had. So you're probably, I'm assuming, streaming your Sunday services online for people that are out of town or they're homesick or whatever, they can't make it to the building. You invest a little bit more to make that a little bit better in production value. You see a rise in interest, in engagement from that because people can't come to the building. But then simultaneously, you see a dip in that a little bit and also a secondary spike in COVID. It just says, hey, this is not a short-term scenario, guys. This could be a long-term thing, and we don't know how long-term. And that led to this really clarifying question. If we could never gather back in our building ever again, our mission hasn't changed, but our method has to change. We have to adapt. What are we going to do? Is that essentially what you guys came to?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Shane, I don't know if you'd add anything to that, but those are the pieces.
So yeah, no, I think you hit it right on the head. Just like we were super passionate about the people around us. And, we live in a world where people are becoming more lonely, more disconnected, dealing more and more with anxiety and stress. And we as a church just can't sit, watch, and react. God has called us to something greater. And we didn't know with certainty, is this the right direction forward? But we decided that we weren't just going to sit and wait for life to return to normal when we knew normal might look very different.
Yeah. And we also don't know the timeline of what normal, even if we do get back to normal, looks like. So walk us through the process, like get really practical for us. Are we talking like we're just in leadership team meetings with a whiteboard, we're spitballing, we're throwing ideas, or is that what this looked like?
Yeah, we're in a leadership team in a big room because we're all really far apart from one another.
That's right. Social distancing in a leadership team meeting. Yeah.
Yeah. And and then we just start spitballing. I mean, that's why I say it was that question, because I don't know, we were, meet once a week. We'd already had 12, 16 leadership team meetings in COVID. And this was the first one. It took about 30 minutes to get from that to our lead pastor talking about, what if we turned every single room in this building into a studio? What if this was like Saturday Night Live? What if we blah, blah, blah. I mean, we're throwing off like all of these kind of off the wall, crazy ideas, some of which have materialized in what we're doing and, some haven't, but it was a completely different energy, completely different conversation than, anything that we had prior to that.
So gone are the conversations of like, how do we make the audio better during our songs and worship online?
Two songs, three songs at the end or what?
Yeah. Do we do the songs at the beginning? Do we do them, how many songs? Should the message only be 12 minutes? Can we get away with 15? Buck, can you please reduce it down from 20, please? Those kinds of conversations out
it's
the
like
window.
You were sitting on our leadership team. Yeah, those were all of the ones prior to that.
We are talking brand new concepts of turning rooms that were once babies' rooms, creche, nursery, into a studio to record whatever is necessary, because we'll never be able to gather, and we want to reach our community with the hope of Jesus. Love it.
Right.
Duncan, I know there's some people that have
Perko, that's just...
Go ahead.
No, I was just to jump in there. I think that's... I struggle to say this because it's really bad, but that's the kind of the positive side of this COVID pandemic.
Absolutely.
It's been negative for so many people. People have lost jobs, they've lost their health, they've lost their futures. I get all that. But the positive side of this is it's given all of us as churches the chance to think differently. I remember one leader recently saying, it's almost like we've squeezed 5 years of considering change into a few months when we've actually had to make those changes. And so I would encourage everybody who's listening, who's involved in some level of church leadership, don't just rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. Don't just fiddle with the little tweaks in the corners. Here is a great opportunity to socially distance gatherings in a room with leaders or on Zoom and say, if we can't meet again, how would our church change? Have the courage to ask those big clarifying questions, and you might well come to some answers that you never ever thought. And you know what it's like in church, you want to make changes and they seem minor changes, but there's always someone who's going to push back on it. You know, now's the time to do that because everybody's expecting change because everything's changed for everybody. Yeah. So if you ever wanted to make a change in church, there has never been a better chance to do that. So I love the fact that you guys grabbed this opportunity and locked yourselves in a room and came. And so for me, I'm just desperate to learn from you. What answers did you come up with? You know, if you say.
And I want to, Duncan, I want to get to that, and we're going to get into that like immediately. But I think before we get into learning you guys' strategy, because I think it's phenomenal, I think it would be we'd be amiss though as church leaders to just copy and paste what you guys came up with without going through the process of discovery for our own context. Because the question you guys asked, that's universal. It's not limited to Austin, Texas, or even a model or a style of church. That's a universal question that I think every church in their unique context has to wrestle with. And actually the product at the end will be far greater because you went through the process rather than just copying and pasting. However, all of that to say, I still love to not have to start and reinvent a wheel. And so I want to get to the flywheel because I feel like you guys may inspire us with some ideas and some creativity to say, oh yeah, that's something that would work in our context, or that would be effective in our particular context. I think that's a great one. As we dive into the flywheel though, for those that are watching, you're in the chat, and thank you so much for jumping into the chat and letting us know where you're tuning in from and what church you're connected with. Please go ahead and pop any questions that you have, especially as we dive into this content, into the chat section, and we'll be assured to address those. I see one that just popped up from Lindsay from LifePoint here in Brisbane. I saw another one from Chris at Beyond Church, and we'd love to get all of those questions to these guys as they dive in.
So Perko, just as these boys are beginning to unveil this flywheel to us, can I just clarify? You've mentioned this flywheel word about 3 times now. Can you just clarify, define it for? Because when I was growing up, I had a hamster called Mikey, and he had a hamster wheel, and it would keep him healthy in his cage. And so you would talk flywheel. I mean, is that like a little wheel for flies just to keep healthy? What is a flywheel?
So I think that it was probably Jim Collins that popularized the concept of a flywheel. But let's be honest, there's farmers that have been using a flywheel on the side of their tractor to cut wood long before Collins ever wrote a book. And the flywheel is really just the principle behind it is to set in motion a series of habits, rhythms, principles that you apply to your organization repeatedly, that once you do it regularly, it gains momentum and helps you to achieve the results and the goals that you're wanting to achieve. So I think that's my best shot at explaining it. Jordan or Shane, you guys have a better explanation of it. Feel free to dive into that. But I say we jump right into what is the flywheel that you guys came up with, and perhaps just walk us through the different aspects of it.
Yeah. So as we started to talk about, what tools do we have that are available to us? And one, on a practical note, I think asking, that question or version of a question to the leadership team in your own organic process, like you had talked about, Jason, was huge, because then having the buy-in from the whole team, there was a degree to which we had to hold each other accountable to it, right? Like when we would throw out ideas, somebody around the room, if it was in kind of an old school thinking, like, hey, that's like church Sunday 1 hour a week is all you have. That's old school thinking. That's what we did. That's really kind of trying to wait back to get to where we were, so we'd have to like catch ourselves in that thinking. And what we landed on was we felt like, it had to be simple. We had to focus on what can we do great in this season. And what rose to the top for us was content, because of the fact that we have people's attention in a different way. They're spending, more time on screens and devices, than ever. They're home, they're isolated. They have less to do right now. And so that was one area to say, how do we, provide great, engaging content? And then the other is we're seeing, as much as ever, Shane is like, hey, I've been touting this my whole life, but we're seeing as much as ever the importance of connection and community to see how desperate people are for that and how core that is to who people are. And so we're like, can we focus on those two? And the reason we called it a flywheel is because we really want one, to point to the other and enforce the other. So this is not like an isolation, like, hey, we're gonna give 50% energy here and 50% to groups. But we want to focus on how does our content point to opportunities for connection, point to opportunities for meetups and to engage. How does the meetups then enforce what's happening with our content so people are growing their relationship with Christ, etc. And so those were the couple of big pieces. And then we reorganized around that. So we have, almost everybody had a new role, a new job description. For practicality, we've talked about it as about this 2 to 3 month experiment. So I don't mean that like you permanently maybe make hiring and firing changes off this right off the bat as you're seeing how it works. But we got, new roles, new job descriptions. That's where my content role came out of. So previously I was, just students, and the content role was to oversee the content half of this flywheel. Our logistics teams and the admins teams, they became producers. They're working on all these sets. We did turn a couple of rooms into studios. So it wasn't every single room in the church like Buck's desire, but we did invest in a couple of rooms to be studios and, quick drop backgrounds that we can make different in a podcast studio and stuff like that, which was really big. Budgets changed to reinforce what's happening online and on social. Our social media team, we completely redid, got some younger voices in the room. And so it was, a lot of organizing around this idea of content and community. And so I'm happy to go into each part as well, but those are the two big pieces that we kind of.
If you can do that, Jordan, go into the specifics of the flywheel, but then as you're discussing it, because I know that you guys work off kind of a hybrid team of full-time staff, part-time staff, and volunteers that you have trained up that have interest in production and producing things and helping with social media and other things. I think just explaining that will be helpful because we're not talking about a church of 100 staff. We're not even talking about a church of 20 staff full-time. We're talking small staff and leveraging high capacity volunteers and part-time roles and contractors to help pull this off. And I think that that's really important to understand for people.
Yep. 100%. Yeah. We, whenever people even ask us how many full-time staff we have, I never really know because it is exactly that. We have so many, we have so many volunteers that like are basically in full-time roles, and it's just, that is a big testament to Buck's leadership. That the heart of that hasn't changed since you were here with us 10 years ago, Perkos, in terms of just, putting people in leadership positions perhaps before they're ready. Part of that's, our philosophy. You don't have to have a master's in theology to run a camera for us, so there's things like that, that is kind of, our approach, but yeah, so it's very much a mix of all of those combos. I can bring up the flywheel again to jump into the parts. So again, I'll speak to the kind of the top half and then hand off to Shane for the bottom half here. But the top half, if you're looking on the webinar, is the content. And we broke those off into kind of 3 parts. So for us, the Sunday conversations are what we're referring to as, what traditionally would be, your Sunday morning service. If you go through series or if you go through books of the Bible, however your church does it, we said that still provides some clarity and some momentum for us as a church. It's something to, look forward to, something to promote, something to help people, remember certain topics and seasons, etc. So it's not like we've done away with those or something like that. We still have in our, service that comes out once a week, etc. And I'm not saying that there isn't, a time and a place for that. But what's interesting is I think, probably all churches pre-COVID have also been saying, church isn't just 1 hour a week. And that's something, a lot of us have talked to and preached to and want people to adhere to, but yet we've always still organized our staff and our teams and our weekly meetings and all that kind of as if it is, it's still preparing for, looking to, and then evaluating this 1 hour a week. And so it started with changing and saying, hey, if, you know, we're going to look at, like Duncan has been saying, these other 167 hours a week, how would we take advantage of that time? And so we have, content-wise, we have these Sunday conversations that are kind of the cornerstone. But this overtime content came out of the concept to say anything that reinforces Sunday, adds context to, etc., falls in the overtime category. So as a communicator, myself, any of you that are lead pastors, you know this, like you could get up and speak for 12 hours probably in any given topic any Sunday, right? Like one of the first immediate things you probably do is a massive cut, just trying to get down a lane, and then you cut again. People think we talk too long right now. Like they don't even know what we could really get up there and do.
They have no idea that didn't get,
yeah.
what didn't get into the message that's still stuck in Evernote.
Absolutely. But we started to ask that question of like, why do we do that to ourselves? Like, why do we, that's old school, that's kind of 1 hour a week thinking. Why do we feel like we only have this, 30-minute or whatever, your preaching window is a week, when there's so much other time that they're consuming so much other content, average person's on their phone 4 or 5 hours a day. Like, why are we not getting into those other hours of the week? And so overtime is where we take a lot of the content that came out of a series brainstorm or whatever, didn't make it into a Sunday message. And we said, now let's sprinkle those over the course of the week. And so sometimes it's a brand new concept or idea. Sometimes it's adding to and reinforcing what we talked about Sunday. But we're meeting people where they're at, which is really cool to think about, because they're now consuming this content in places where they can actually do something about it, right? Like they're not in a row on a Sunday morning, but they're at their place of work, or they're in their home, they're with their family. They can have an immediate conversation. They can sign up for counseling on the spot. They can change their finances. I mean, they're in a place where I think application can go up because they can actually do something about it. And so we've branded that whole kind of category, if it's specifically related to the Sunday conversation, is overtime content. So our new podcast is in that. That's not novel to every church, but our podcast we do once a week now, where we add a lot of context and conversation. We do a lot of bite-sized content. So we're still trying to shrink those. We're still having the shrinking conversations like we used to have on Sunday morning, but we're trying to get our Instagram, if it's a video, trying to get it under 2 minutes. 2 minutes. If it's on YouTube, we're trying to get it under 5. We're still trying to, force those and fine tune those. But this kind of more bite size, like I can consume that. I have attention span for that. I can watch this at work. I can listen in the car, in my room, wherever I happen to be at the time.
So Jordan, give me a couple of examples, specifically overtime content. You've talked about podcasts, and then you've talked about short form content. And I've seen some of what you guys are putting out. So for instance, I know one of the short form contents that I watched was a book review that tied into a message from the previous Sunday. And I've actually seen that a couple of times now. So somebody says, hey, we're in this series, and this series really ties into a book that I read a couple of years ago that impacted my life. They share a very quick, here's what it impacted my life. Here's kind of a summary of the book. And now here's also a way for you to go grab that book off of Amazon or Audible so that you could then consume that content. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, 100%. It usually starts with like a reference to the previous, because again, this one is reinforcing the Sunday conversation. So quick reference to the series of the part, or hey, here's the bottom line, or here's what Buck talked about. What's kind of the action point? Like what's my main point or my bottom line? What's like the one thing I want you to do real quick or would suggest? And then what are you pushing them to? We'd love you, to join us for the conclusion, this coming Sunday, or we unpack it further or whatever it might be. And yeah, we've had a lot of those. And sometimes it's something that would have been a total sidebar conversation. We had gone through a series where we were talking about faith. There was a Sunday conversation that was all around like faith, trust, what does it mean, etc. Buck had wanted to have this kind of sidebar question about, well, one of the greatest barriers to faith is when tragedy happens in life, the question of why do bad things happen to good people. We're like, hey, Buck, if you introduce that randomly on a Sunday, you've just added 5 minutes, which is 25% of what we've already allotted you. Make that an overtime conversation. And so he, you know, released a 4-minute video on touch points of, hey, why do bad things happen to good people? And it's something that would have seemed kind of out of left field on the Sunday conversation, but then he was able to have that conversation and on a practical sense. I mean, that went up on, I think, Facebook, Instagram, and our YouTube, you know, channel as well. And it was really well, you know, engaged with. The book reviews, to your point, we've done a lot of those. That are like trying to push people to another resource. Here's something where you can go and explore this further. You know, we talked about Ramsey when we did a financial piece on a Sunday, and, you know, hey, here's the baby steps, here's something to go explore, etc. So as often as we can to try and make it practical and reinforce Sunday is kind of the, you know, the hope and the desire with that.
Jordan, can I just dive in just real quickly here? I have lots of conversations with churches all around the UK and around Ireland, which is where our Further Faster network is based, both with churches that have joined our network and other churches that are leaning in and interested as well. And what you're talking about answers two of the questions that I get all the time. So at the moment, there's one church in particular where the pastor's saying to me, all his people are saying, all we ever see on Sundays now is the pastor and maybe the worship leader. We want to see more church people. We want to see more and you can't just have endless interviews and endless church people on your YouTube Sunday morning service. So they're wrestling with how does the church feel like it's part of the church? Whereas if you've got overtime conversations, you can have a whole bunch of different faces involved in book reviews, involved in doing a little 3-minute devotion on why God allows bad things to happen to good people, etc., etc. And the other question it answers is we used to have loads of people in serving roles. And when you serve, you feel like you're part of the church. You own it. It's not your church anymore. It's my church because I'm serving in it. And again, things like overtime give lots of different people a chance to serve in the backroom jobs of filming, editing, creating, color grading, uploading to these different platforms. And, you know, maybe that's the teenage element or the younger element of church life, which is why I loved earlier on you saying we need to have younger voices around the table. But it also gives people to serve, not just in the backroom stuff, but the front stuff. So you can say to someone who's really good in front of a camera, I want you to figure out some books and do some book reviews. Here are the subjects for the next couple of months. Do some book reviews. Do a 2-minute conversation. So it answers these questions of getting more people serving and seeing more church people on screen and realizing it doesn't all have to be around the hour on Sunday. The content can drop out, like you say, in so many different forms across so many different platforms for the other 167 hours a week, so that I can grab that conversation in a podcast as I'm driving to work or as I'm walking the dog, or I can actually flick up a YouTube page while I'm bored in an evening or while I'm bored at work or whatever it might be. So yeah, it's beginning to answer a lot of questions that a lot of our pastors have got right now.
Yeah, I saw, Jordan, I saw a great example of what you guys are talking about. I think you were doing a series on relationships and you had your children's ministry director talk about an article referring to like the art of listening, essentially, and what are the habits of a good listener. And so she just walked through these steps of the Harvard Business Review article that had been impactful in her journey of becoming a great listener years before, but it tied into the series, even though it wasn't necessarily referred to in the Sunday conversation or the message, as a lot of, you know, the preach that a lot of us would refer to as Jordan, you were going to say.
No, I think even that one is a great example of what Duncan was saying, because I don't want us to like underestimate the power of all the different voices that you are able to include, because there's so many things that happen as a result of that. It's more shareable. I mean, when you see like, you know, your lead pastor only all the time, there's just a normalcy to that. There's nothing wrong with it, but there's a normalcy. Whereas when it's these new faces, you know, so that lady, so many of her friends shared that. It was one of our most viewed videos. They were so excited for her, right? Because it was a new face. They were proud of her, etc. You're able to bring in, you know, experts on areas. I think it's old school thinking to make it, you know, to where your lead pastor has to be an expert on everything in life, which is really the pressure that we put on our lead pastors, right? Let them be faith experts, let them be Bible experts, whatever it might be. But, we just did this money series, and we've got CFOs that we brought in to, talk about a certain topic. We have, people that have started their own financial firms and, come in and let them be a part of the podcast, and let these experts in your church, have a voice and speak to these, topics. And it creates owners as well. It creates vision owners when they, have an opportunity to be a part. They take it so seriously. I mean, how often we're always communicating how normal that can be for us, but you give somebody this one-off opportunity, they want to make it great, they're excited, they're telling their friends about it, and there's a loyalty and a buy-in to your church as well. So there's a lot of things there in what Duncan said, why this is additionally a really cool opportunity.
So let me ask you this question, Jordan, and I'm assuming, I hope that you guys have wrestled with this. I'm asking a question that I didn't pre-warn you about. Do you guys have a win statement for the overtime category? Like, if you were to define, hey, our podcast, these short form videos, whatever content falls into the overtime category, what's the win? What's your hope for those pieces that go out?
Yeah, we've said the whole kind of content category. We just want to create compelling content that's helpful. And so, those basically the two big words being compelling, like it's interesting, it's engaging, it's high energy, it's relevant, etc., and helpful in terms of it, it has a next step. So it just pushes somebody towards either community. I mean, that's the whole flywheel piece, is it's, hey, we've got a meetup happening on this topic, or it provides something like a resource, here's something you can check out, here's something you can sign up for, here's a question you can ask your spouse, etc. But it's really, application focused, because again, it is so short and they're consuming it in a place, where they're at. So, and that's the overtime half. I don't, for the sake, I want to hand it off to Shane too, for the opportunity for a community. I think the other piece of this flywheel that we haven't talked about is what we've branded as the 4 Talks.
Yes.
Whatever you were to call it. I personally am so excited about this, and I'm interested to see where it goes, especially when we are meeting in person again, etc. But the 4 Talks, we just said there also needs to be a category that is disconnected from Sunday. Behind the scenes, we've branded that as an attractional category. So that's kind of what we're calling this group of content. And we've branded this one section 4 Talks. But something that is disconnected from Sunday, that, casts vision to your church, that is helpful, that is practical, that is shareable, etc. And so the reason that the 4 Talks conversation came up is we said there's something that perhaps is unique to maybe church world and maybe education, where the content that I consume, so if I come on a Sunday morning, the content is already decided for me. Any other form of content that I consume, so when I'm thinking, whatever it is, YouTube, Netflix, Hulu, Spotify, iTunes, like, it doesn't matter. Like, I choose that content. And I usually preview it first, right? I watch a trailer, I scrub through it or whatever, but I go on and I decide what it is that the content is that I want to consume. Perhaps there's some ads suggesting what content I might want to consume based on an algorithm.
I was going to say the algorithm decides, but you think you're in
exactly.
control. No.
Yeah,
but the algorithm, though, this is important, Jordan. The algorithm is deciding based upon your preferences. So
Correct.
it is artificial intelligence saying, hey, this is the kind of content that this guy or this person consumes, so I'm going to suggest more of that kind of content. And you're saying, right, Jordan, that education and the church are perhaps the only 2 places in the world where we typically don't get to decide our content. It's not tailored to our taste.
Right.
And again, Jordan, for me, the beautiful thing about this is you're beginning to answer another one of the questions that all of our churches are asking, and where all of our churches are wrestling with this. I want to attract new people. I want to reach new people, but I also want to keep my core engaged, because they give, they serve, they're going to keep the mission going for the long haul. And we've tried to funnel all of that onto a Sunday morning. And that's a really hard thing to do. But what you're saying here is, look, primarily with overtime, it's probably going to be more of your engaged core that are leaning into that, because they might well have started the conversation on a Sunday. But also there's the whole 4 Talks. So you can say to your friend who's told you that they're struggling with money or bereavement or loss right now, hey, there's a 5-minute talk that you might be interested in. I'll send you the link. And it's for your community, it's for your friends, it's for you to reach out to people who don't normally come. So you've managed to give church these two different places where they can distinctly say, primarily this is about engaging our core, and primarily this is about reaching new people. So
Exactly.
it just is ticking lots of boxes. It's answering lots of questions, which is why I think out of all the conversations we've had on these webinars, Perko, this is the most electric. And I feel like everybody needs to hear this because
Super practical.
It's so helpful.
Yeah. So Jordan, walk us through, like, maybe give us an example of, first of all, tell us a little bit of the brand for Talks, because I don't know that, you know, everyone is familiar with the idea of the four concept that Jeff Henderson has so well coined and has helped so many churches literally around the world be for their community. Maybe walk us through, what is the four brand and how does that play out practically in this kind of Netflix type of content? Yeah.
Yeah, so we have launched for Austin here, and the kind of for branding methodology is the kind of bottom line of that is for too long the church has been known for what it's against. We want to be known for what we're for. Yeah. And so, you know, for it's a community engagement initiative. It's a way that we serve, show our community that we're for them. We've got for all over our building. We've got for on all of our shirts, you know, et cetera. And that's kind of the approach that we've taken here with For Talks, is to say, hey, this is a branding where we're not the hero, but the attendee is the hero. The listener on the other side is the hero. Story Brand by Donald Miller is where we've gotten a lot of this, you know, thinking as well. That's just such a great resource, such a great book. But this is a concept to say, like, we just want to provide content that is helpful to somebody where they're at. And we said For Talks kind of, you know, would be a very simple way to communicate that. So I'm sharing now npaustin.com/For Talks, so I can give kind of a practical example of what this looks like. Yep. But the dream, and again, we're a couple months into this, I think we've got like 20 or 25 of these For Talks created now, but the dream is to say, like, what if we can build our own Netflix kind of library of content, if you will? And the example I gave, I think talking to you guys offline, was to say, you know, what if you're in the middle of a series on serving, which is fantastic, great, everybody's, you know, for serving, wonderful, but you're a family who just had a new child, you know, and you're like, all I can think about right now is keeping this human alive. You know, yes. That's all that I'm consumed with. Like, I wish I had time, you know, that's great. I'll talk to you in a year or two. But I'll take everything that you have right now about parenting. Like, I'll take a 3-minute video on parenting right now, because I'm thinking about that in a whole new lens or light, right? As you know, one example of something of how could we provide content that meets people where they're at. Or if, you know, your marriage is in shambles and, you know, we're talking about whatever, how to read the Bible, that's fantastic. I'd love to know how to read it better, but all I can think about right now is I'm in crisis. And so this For Talks, so these are we've broken it down into these four kind of categories right here of for faith, for relationships, for leadership, and for personal health. And then, you know, I'll click on the for faith one here. You know, now we have just a series of videos. There's how to pray, how do I read the Bible, forgiveness, different ways to connect with God, identity. These are like the first 5 that we've released with faith, etc. Right? And you can see all of these are minutes long and standalone and meant to be very shareable, etc. And I think Shane had the one. Yeah, Shane had one that was just unhurried. So this is Shane's here. And Shane's hurry video had as many views this past week as our Sunday morning conversation did, which is just interesting to see which topics, you know, resonate and which ones don't. Yeah. And then, you know, you click on any one of these and it will link it to, you know, other ones in that category, etc. So that's when we're saying Netflix style, right? I mean, we've just rolled this out in the past 6 weeks, but that's what we're kind of referring to, of saying I can go and find content that's relevant to me and where I'm at right now.
Yeah. And Jordan, just on that, again, sometimes, you know, for our churches, we can look at that and we can say, yeah, but you've turned some of the rooms in your building into studios and you've probably got really expensive cameras and lighting and microphones. But actually, you know, even if you don't have a building, you can spend $10 on a really nice little stand for an iPhone, and the quality of recording you get out of an iPhone is incredible. And then you can spend maybe $50 on a really decent microphone for your iPhone. And you can, for a very small amount of money, as long as your face is pointing to the window and you've got some light on your face, you can get decent video, decent quality. And at the end of the day, it's about the quality of the content, less about the quality of the video craft. And so we can all do this. We don't have to have, amazing technicians and technical budgets to be able to do this. It's doable for all of us.
Yeah. Well, and that background is white paper. I mean, that's like, it's a giant sheet of, that's when we say studio, there's a white, a gray, a black paper that will roll down, and then we have a green one so we can turn the green screen into whatever we want. But I mean, it's like, we're rolling on a budget too. So I agree. There's lots of ways that you can be creative and do this.
Hey, we are going to shift to the other part of the flywheel, because I'm super pumped to get Shane to share with us a little bit about community. In order to transition that, I'm actually going to bring in somebody that's watching from the UK. Matt is going to be joining us. Matt has a question that I think is going to really be helpful in leading us into the community thing. Matt, good to see you, mate. Thanks for jumping in on the webinar. And I'd love it if you would just ask your question to these guys, because I think it's going to be a great transition into the next part of the flywheel.
Cool. Thank you very much. Yes. So I was wondering, I had a question about promotion. So getting people from like each section of the flywheel to the next section. Have you got some practical examples, or how do you think about transitioning people from, say, the Sunday conversations to the next bit? And is that all you promote at that event? Do you promote sort of the next step, or do you promote other stuff as well?
Yeah, it's a great question, Matt, and thanks for asking it. I think in reality, people spend a whole lot of time on social media and on their devices. And we want to create ways that we can promote our content by them seeing it pop up on their feed. And so Jordan and his team have done a tremendous job of finding ways that we can encourage people to take a step into Talks or Overtime, just as these small videos, pictures. We love fun. We think church has been too serious for far too long. And so we also promote our content through ways that we can make people laugh with small videos that actually sometimes have nothing to do with church, but might pique someone's interest to have them click on a Talk or a piece of overtime content. And I think, Jordan, we now look at a week, not necessarily Sunday to Saturday. We look at a week from Thursday through Wednesday, correct? And we are promoting then on Wednesday the content that's going to come out on Sunday. And after Sunday, we're thinking about, okay, what Talks, what overtime content do we want to promote on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday through people's social media feeds as we go through the rest of the week until we start the next week on Thursday. Jordan, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
So Sunday essentially is no longer the pinnacle event of the church weekly calendar. It is now a readjustment to your weekly schedule, basically, is what you're saying.
Well, hang on a minute. So you said, all of our churches have said church is so much more than Sunday, and yet we keep making Sunday the king. Mm-hmm. And now you're saying Sunday is just another part of content and community. It's another part of what we do as church. And so you physically changed your week to recognize that. So your week starts midweek. It doesn't start on a Sunday.
Yeah, and I think we never would have done that if it wasn't for COVID. Like, I don't think we ever would have thought about the question does our week look different today if it wasn't for the situation that we're in today?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, 100%. And then I think plugging those on each piece of content, Shane, is kind of what you're speaking to. So for example, our hosting on the Sunday conversation every week highlights the meetups that were happening that week. We send out, an email that's called Meetup Mondays. And so it's, all of the opportunities that are these, points for connection happening this week. if it's in the message and we know that there's a Zoom call happening on parenting, there's a meetup for parenting, we highlight that actually in the message to say, hey, here's a next step this week if you're interested in more. So it's definitely a discipline, and we've missed opportunities too. Like that happens a lot. We're like, oh, this would have been a perfect opportunity to plug. We should have referenced this. And so we're learning it as we go. But a lot of times it's an intro or a conclusion to any piece of like content, video, hosting on a Sunday, etc.
Yeah, I think it's important that we have to realize that our church or the people we're trying to reach don't always watch the Sunday experience. So we have to have other ways to promote and communicate these events. But sometimes I feel like we promote things as if everyone is watching our Sunday morning experience, and that's not necessarily true.
Yeah, no, that's good. Hopefully that's helpful, Maddie.
That's perfect. Thanks,
we'll kick you back out to the attendee list, mate, so you don't have to stare at your dad for the rest of the webinar. How does that sound?
Perfect.
We've got some more questions that I'd like to get to, Shane. But while we're getting to those questions, walk us through the bottom half of that flywheel. We'll bring it back up on the screen. Walk us through, because I know some people are asking specifically, hey, what's a meetup? Explain what you mean by that. What's a next level group? Like most people, I think, are probably going to be familiar with the concept of a community group, but maybe walk us through those other parts of community.
For sure. You know, that question that we talked about from the very beginning, what happens or what do we do if we never can get into our building again, helped us kind of think through this community piece. But another question that I wrestle with being just involved in groups is, can people deepen their faith without ever being in our building? And I think we act as if the answer is no, they can't, but in reality, they can. And so if people can grow without ever being in our building, what is our role in encouraging them to grow? And, you know, we may never know, or we may not know today what the fall is going to look like, let alone 6 weeks from now. But one thing we do know is that God designed every single person for community and for relationships. And we believe that it's within healthy community that people are most likely to be encouraged to grow, discover belonging, and find purpose. But we also know that just like content, community isn't one size fits all. And we want to provide community opportunities that resonates with and meets people right where they're at. And so our first step into community, or let's say our widest funnel, starts with meetups. And you could look at a meetup much like an affinity group. I mean, they are simply a way to connect people around a shared interest. We have meetups that are CrossFit events for people that love to do CrossFit, knitting, mountain biking, book clubs, conversation with a licensed counselor around parenting in today's world. If it's a topic, an activity, or a hobby people are interested in doing with others today, we're going to do our best to have a meetup around it. And like, why is it important that we try to create opportunities for people just to get together and do something together? Well, I think it's important to look at where people are today when it comes to Christianity. And a lot of the world today, people are very skeptical of Christianity, and they don't trust a Christian. Yeah. And how can we have influence on people if we have absolutely no trust with them, or if they have no trust with us? And so how do we build trust? Well, it starts with spending time with people. And we don't necessarily have to spend time getting into theology or sharing the gospel from day one. I think day one, it's how do we start to build trust, and it's spending time with people. And so how do we do that? Well, why don't we create meetups that give people an opportunity to do something that they're really excited about doing anyways? Yeah. And so that's why we are focusing on creating a variety of meetups that help people connect around a shared interest.
Well, and I love the affinity concept of the meetup, because it takes all the weirdness out of it. Like if I said to you, hey, I'd like to meet up so I could build trust with you, that's really weird. But hey, I really like CrossFit, which I don't happen to personally love CrossFit. I'm a Pilates guy, and Reformer Pilates to be specific. But that's an affinity that I have with other people, and it takes all the weirdness out of it. But I can essentially use the excuse of our shared interest to leverage that to build trust with someone, which, as we know, is oftentimes the first step in somebody's journey towards Jesus, is just trusting somebody that's a follower of Jesus.
Yeah. So is that just in your context, Shane? So
Yeah,
sorry, I
go
was just
ahead,
saying,
Duncan.
in your context, Shane, is might be a little different to us. It's kind of might be quite hard at the moment to point to meetups, just because of the restrictions that we have because of COVID. So certainly, some places in Ireland, in the UK, meeting up is not easy right now.
And you guys, Shane,
So
you do have some digital meetups as well, though, that you do, yeah?
Correct. Like I would challenge churches to think about what are the felt needs of the people that we are trying to reach today, and how can we innovate to get people to connect. And connect doesn't mean I have to be within 6 feet of someone else. We do have meetups that take place online for people that aren't comfortable meeting in person for a variety of reasons, but we also have meetups that meet in person, and we have hybrid meetups as well. So our context may look different, but what I do know is there are opportunities or ways that people can connect across the world. I think we as churches just have to kind of figure out, what does that look like for our people to connect, for our people to experience what we're looking for.
So the meetups then, Shane, the hope is that they might, and obviously, like you said, community is not a one size fits all, and people also don't move in a linear fashion towards the kind of the penultimate community that we want them to get into. They can jump all over the place. They might connect in a meetup, but then get into a short-term group or jump into a next level group, whatever that looks like. So walk us through, though, what are some of the other types of groups that you guys are providing during the season?
For sure. We talked about meetups. Our second part of our flywheel are community groups, and they're just like small groups. Most people are familiar with that concept, and it's a place where we want to encourage people to pursue authentic community and spiritual growth. And in the past, most of our community groups would be anywhere from 18 months to 2 years to 3 years, depending on the DNA of a specific group. But we know that it's unrealistic to try to ask someone to commit to long-term community when they have no idea what 6 weeks from now is going to look like, when they're still trying to figure out what school looks like for their children. And so instead of trying to force people into what we've always encouraged them to do, we've had to adapt and change the way we look at our community groups. And so today, most of our community groups are not 18 months to 2 years, they're 6 to 8 weeks. We feel like people are more open to the idea of a short-term commitment as opposed to a long-term commitment. And we also are trying to create short-term groups that align with topics and felt needs that people resonate with. And how do we point people from a fore talk and an overtime content into a short-term group? So, we have meetups and content for parents, because parents today are wrestling with, what does it look like for me to homeschool my kids when I've never done this before? And so we want to create meetups and short-term groups that resonate with parents right where they're at today. So we have short-term community groups that are designed specifically for parents of teenagers, for parents with young kids, because we feel like this is what's going to encourage people to take a step into community.
Yeah. So
and then our
next level groups?
Yeah, next level groups are a lot like community groups. They are encouraged to help people pursue authentic community and spiritual growth, but they prioritize the growth aspect of the experience. And they're not just designed to help people grow in their faith. They're designed to help people grow in their leadership, in their personal health, in areas that people are looking to grow. I mean, I'll tell you from a men's perspective, like, I'm passionate about helping men find community. And there's a lot of men out there that don't feel like they're a great leader, but I think they have the potential to be an incredible leader. And so we've developed these leadership development groups all around the idea of helping men discover what God has designed them to do. And to be quite frank, they're discipleship groups. But there's a lot of men that aren't going to sign up for a group that we call discipleship group. But there are a lot of men that are interested in having a conversation around, what is a leadership development group? And hey, I recognize that you have a lot of leadership qualities. And would you ever consider being a part of a group that's focused on helping you grow as a leader? Men are excited about that far more than they are about the whole idea of discipleship.
No, it's fantastic.
And this process, this community process, isn't linear. Like, it's not like we want to move everybody from a meetup to a community group to a next level group. I think there are a lot of people that whether they're an unchurched person that's stepping foot into the church for the very first time, or a church experience for the very first time, or someone that's been in church their entire life, their next best step might be a meetup, or it might be a next level group. So the challenge that we face today is really when somebody comes to our website or comes into our front door virtually or online or through a relationship, how do we best help them take the right next step for them? And that's not necessarily a meetup, and that's not necessarily a next level group, but how do we come alongside them and encourage them to take that next step?
Yeah, no, that's good. So Shane, tell me, and Jordan as well, I've got a question from somebody that I want to get to here in just a second. What are you guys doing to measure the effectiveness of this strategy? I know it's new, but have you guys looked at, hey, what are we looking for? What are the metrics that we want to measure in order to determine, is this being effective or not? What does that look like currently?
Yeah, on the content side, that's basically like our whole, social media website dashboard. And so we're tracking, engagements, shares, click-throughs, all kinds of different stuff like that, to just see, what are people engaging with it in the first place? And, that are they taking the action step? Did they, go and ask their husband or wife the actual question we challenged them to? Is a little bit harder to actually see. Shane can speak to the group side in terms of, all of meetup, RSVPs, all of, community group entries, stuff like that. But basically views and signups, are all like almost the simplest way. And the actual dashboard is complex and has a whole bunch of numbers on it that are fun to look at. We don't always know how to interpret, can kind of justify whatever we want to see, but.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we're still trying to answer that question, Jason, and we're looking at different things, but from like a community perspective, like we want to know how many people are signing up for a meetup, how many people are attending a meetup, how many people are coming back to a second meetup. And, our vision is to create a church unchurched people love to attend. So a big metric that we are watching is, has somebody taken a step into a meetup that wasn't in our system?
Yeah.
And what we're seeing is people that have never stepped foot in Northpoint are stepping foot into a meetup. And to us, that is a tremendous deal.
That is a huge win. This comes back to, Duncan, what we talked about on some other webinars and some other podcasts that we've done. I think of recently the one that we did with Reggie Joyner, where we said, what would it look like for a family to say that they partner with our church, but never attend our church on a Sunday? But they feel like our church is a partner with them, but they don't attend on Sundays. I think that's such a powerful concept for us to really be thinking through. Hey, I want to bring somebody in to ask a final question because we are running overtime. Speaking of overtime on the flywheel, we are now into our overtime. But I think we've got time for one more question, and then we'll wrap things up right after this. This is Sarah, and Sarah has a question around promotion of groups, Shane. I think this is hopefully going to be helpful for her, as they're trying to, at the moment, really push for groups, but they're not getting as much traction as they would like to potentially have. So Sarah, you are live on the webinar, and we would love it if you would ask your question for these guys. And maybe Sarah, Sarah, start out by telling us where you're tuning in from and what church you're connected with.
Yeah, my name is Sarah. I'm connected to Abundant Life Christian Church in Limerick in the Republic of Ireland. I'm the creative ministry director there. And we have been in, I would say, 6 to 7 months of active online engagement with services, and then have reintroduced physical in-house services recently. And I've just launched a new season of life groups, mostly based on interests, like has been discussed already. And we've had surprisingly low engagement and signups, which is very unusual for us in our culture. I guess my question would be how to handle that in a situation where perhaps people are psychologically so used to now doing the opposite and staying away from people. How can we, I suppose, encourage people who do feel safe to re-engage in person where people can? And also, how, as a church, how can we promote this very successfully. I think sometimes we don't think creatively enough in terms of how to communicate the groups and why people should lean into them in this season. So I'd love some tips in that.
Sarah, it's nice to meet you, and it's a very great question. We launched groups ourselves just a few weeks ago, and we did not know what it would look like as far as signups go, and our numbers were also a little bit lower than we were hoping for. But I love how you want to look at it as like, what does this mean for us, and how do we adjust? Because you know as well as I do that people still need community. And before I answer your question, just last night my community group met for the second time in a long time, and it was funny. One of my group members at the very end of group, he shared with the group how him and his wife, when group started back up after we hadn't met in person together for 6 months, he's like, both of us were like, we weren't looking forward to it. We had got into this new pattern, and we're like, does community still fit in our lives today? And they almost didn't come to group. And he, at the very end of group, said, I am so glad that we did, because we realized again what we had been missing. People, I think, are very forgetful, and they experience what's going on around them today, but they don't necessarily remember what they experienced 6 months ago. And so my encouragement to you is to try to think of ways that you can make the first rung into community as low as possible. And so, because we didn't get a great response to our community group launch, two things that we're doing is, number one, we're going to survey our group members that prior to COVID, they were heavily involved in community groups. Well, what are they feeling about group today? Those that didn't sign up for a group. So I want to know what people are thinking in regards to community, so I don't keep banging my head against the wall doing the same thing, knowing that, you know what, people might not be ready today for any sort of long-term community group, and that's okay. And so the second thing we're doing is we are rethinking, what does it look like for us to have maybe different levels of meetups? Mountain biking is level one. It's an activity that people can do together, but a conversation around parenting is more of a level two. And so we're going to focus on creating additional meetups that lowers that rung into community. That way, when we're ready and when people are ready to get back into long-term or short-term community groups, we've got them experiencing meetups, and we think they'll be more open to the idea of community maybe later in the fall or in January. That might be a long answer to your question, but that's what I got. Jordan, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's comprehensive, and I think that's like the number one greatest challenge. So I think it's a fantastic question.
Yeah, and
Shane,
Sarah, what you're experiencing is normal. And recognize that our Heavenly Father is so much greater, and He has a plan for the people that you're trying to get into community, and that plan just might look a little different today. But I cannot wait to see what He's got in store for you guys. So don't give up. Keep innovating. Keep coming up with ideas that can help people take a step into community.
Shane, I love what you said. You just said that, hey, we've got to get creative and figure out how do we lower the rung and make it more accessible. And again, I love that concept. I love the principle because it's universal. It might look different in Ireland than it does in Austin, Texas, but the question is still helpful no matter what your context is. So that's really good.
It's just a little less sunny in Ireland and a lot more rainy. That's all.
That's true. Probably a true story. Sarah, thanks so much for jumping in to the panel and asking your question. I'll send you back out to be an attendee again as we wrap things up.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. We're glad that you were able to jump in and ask your question live. So guys, as we begin to wrap up, we've got some people asking some really great questions. And so we're not going to be able to get to all of them because of time. One of the great questions is, how do you mobilize current small group leaders to become meetup facilitators? So how do you take your current volunteers and say, hey, would you help facilitate a meetup? Another great question is, how do you get volunteer communicators to jump in and be a part of those 4 talks? that you could, how do you invite those people into those conversations, or even, the CFO to jump into your podcast? So lots of really great questions. Here's what we'd love to do. We'd love it, Shane and Jordan. I know tons of people are going to want to reach out to you directly with questions regarding content, possibly Jordan, Shane, questions around community. And I'd love it if you would just share quickly, hey, what's the best way to connect with you? I know, Shane, you are just a phenom on social media, so we should probably make sure that everyone gets your Instagram handle so that they can follow along. But what's the best way to communicate with you guys?
I still like to use that archaic form of communication called email.
Oh, yeah.
And so
familiar.
People can reach me at shane.norcross@npaustin.com. I'm on Instagram so much that I don't even know what my handle is on the top of my head.
That's so good.
But yeah, I definitely reach out to me on email. I would love to engage in conversations, to hear what others are doing, because we don't have all the answers, but I think we are better as a church when we work on it together.
Absolutely. So I've just popped into the chat for everyone. It's shane.norcross@npaustin.com. Hopefully I spelled that correctly. Double check that for me, Shane. Make sure I didn't mess that up. There may be some weird Canadian spelling that I'm not familiar with of the name Shane. Jordan, what's the best way to connect with you, mate?
Yeah, Shane has my generation taught me how to use email. So I can use that still as well. Jordan.geist@npaustin.com works. Jordan_Geist is my Instagram handle. And if you can find, me and Decipher through other Jordan Geists on Facebook as well. Facebook Messenger would work also. So
yeah, awesome. That'd be great. I know that there will be people that have questions. I also know people are interested in even some of the things like the branding that you guys have used for meetups. I've already had a couple of churches reach out to me and say, hey, I really love the branding for their meetup thing. It, it ties into community groups and all that really well. The way the E's are looking at each other, all that stuff. And I know you guys are super generous, and so you'd be more than willing to share what you guys are able to. So it looks like Shane's also found his Instagram handle as well, which is awesome. Well, listen, guys, thank you so much. Duncan, thank you, mate, for your time today.
It's been an absolute joy. I mean, for me, the big takeaway I've got here is what used to happen in church was, hey, if you're new here and you've enjoyed it, join one of our small groups. And we think that's a small step. And actually, that's a massive chasm for a new person to step over. You want me to come around a stranger's house and talk about the Bible with 7 or 8 other people? Are you kidding me? And what this does is it gives us some fantastic next steps. You finish something on a Sunday and you say, hey, we live online. You'll find content, you'll find groups that you can go to digitally. Everything's there for you to go and enjoy. And it just makes that next step doable for absolutely everybody. So thank you, boys. Tremendous, absolutely tremendous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Jason and Duncan. We are delighted and honored to be here. This is a great opportunity for us.
Yeah, super fun to have you guys. I think the big takeaway for me is the fact that these questions that you guys wrestled with are the same questions that we can all wrestle with in our context, and then we can share what we're learning. And I appreciate the fact that the things that you guys are doing are very doable. It's not out of reach for people to be able to say, hey, even in my context, these are the types of content that we can put out into our community. These are the types of community that we can offer for our community as well. So really appreciate it. Super helpful.
Well, we hope this episode of Bricks and Clicks was helpful. If it was, then we'd love if you could leave us a review on your preferred podcast platform. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you are leading a church in Australia, the UK, or Ireland, we'd love to help you grow your church by reaching unchurched people. Go to www.bricksandclickpodcast.com and click on your country's flag to find a whole bunch of free resources to help your church go further, faster, and become irresistible once again.